Это доклад Сорина ХЕРМОНа и Франко Николуччи, 3D Archaeology, Research Methodology and the Applicability Aspects, some preliminary thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Daria, for inviting me to this conference. It's really a privilege to be here. I also thank Daria that she puts me just before the coffee break. So I'm standing between you and the coffee, so I will try to be brief. My name is Sorin, and I work in Cyprus in a research institute that aims at integrating sciences and technology for archaeological research. So as such, what I will show you here is part of our research approach, which relates to digital archaeology, virtual archaeology, cyber archaeology, whatever term one is convenient for him to use. So I start with a brief history of research, and what you see here are one of the first attempts at using virtual archaeology quite a long time ago now. And these are snapshots from a video presented at one of the earliest computer applications in archaeology conferences by Paul Rayleigh, the first speaker here. And his aim was to show how we can virtually contextualize an archaeological find and its stratigraphic provenance. So since then, there was quite a lot of work. A very important step in this research was through a book published, again, quite a long time ago, Virtual Reality in Archaeology. Since then, there were several publications of conferences, edited books. An important step that was mentioned also before is the London Charter that presented in a, I hope, coherent and constructive way the principles that should guide us into using 3D in archaeology and cultural heritage. And finally, also in Russia, two years ago, the first virtual archaeology conference. There are some major initiatives in the western part of the world. So this is my bias because I'm not very familiar with, unfortunately, with the work that is going on here in Russia. But in the West, let's say, there were some big initiatives. One of them is called Rome Reborn, and it was a first attempt of 3D presenting some moments of the history of the city of Rome in very large scale. Another big project at world level is SciArc, where they go around the world and 3D digitize very important monuments. Also, Europe is trying to catch the pace of this development, and some 10 years ago they started an important initiative called Europeana, where they gather digital information about the European cultural heritage. So trying to summarize a bit where we stand now in terms of 3D archaeology, and looking at data cycle, from a data cycle approach, in terms of acquisition, we have now several methods, several tools. In the last computer applications in archaeology conference that was in April in Siena, we saw really a lot of drones and other types of drones and other types of drones and scanners and devices that help optimizing the process of data capturing. But as a side note, I haven't seen so much investment in evaluating these methods. What is the added value of each one of the methods that has been proposed? In terms of data processing, we have a very important software which is an open source mesh lab, which, by the way, was developed not really for cultural heritage questions, but it is used and it's quite popular because it is open source. There are some dedicated software. I put here just 2 of them, but there are several others that deal with 3D. But again, they are not software that were developed to answer particular questions in particular research questions in archaeology and cultural heritage, but were developed for other reasons. So, by the way, this is a trend that exists since a long time in archaeology as a research. We are trying to catch up with developments in other disciplines and bring them in archaeology, and here we have no exception from that. In terms of archiving, CDOC-CRM is an ontology which started from a very basic question that museums have, especially when they loan objects, when they move objects from one department to the other, and this is how to record in a coherent way the descriptions of these objects. Since then, CDOC-CRM has been developed a lot. It is an ISO standard, and it is currently applied in many different domains related to archaeology. 1.5 years ago, the European Commission financed a very large-scale infrastructure project called Ariadne, which aims at finding the ways for establishing a research infrastructure for data sharing, digital data sharing in archaeology. And finally, the analysis itself. Again, we have some open source, free software, proprietary software, but we are missing, in my opinion, a verified methodology for putting everything into a scientific perspective. So just to give you a very simple example, if you are thinking, so I heard this term already here, 3D models. Everybody talks about 3D models. Everybody knows what is a 3D model. But let's try to look a bit into more detail. What is a 3D model? So we can describe it mathematically, but okay, this is not really maybe a very good description, especially when we are into a very virtual and visual world. Maybe a 3D model is a point cloud. Definitely not, because we need a frame for that. So maybe a meshed model is a 3D model. Okay, so what? So if you are trying to describe it and identify it a bit better, and we try to look at what defines, what is the essence of anything, not particularly a 3D model, but in this case 3D model, we have a substance. We need to have a substance that differentiates it from other instances. It needs to have an identity, so we have to distinguish these instances from the other one. And it must exist within a given period of time. And it has to have unity. Okay? So if we want to ask what is a 3D model, we may start by thinking about these criteria. So again, here is just an example of how we can describe the substance, the matter of 3D model. They have to be associated to something, to an object, either real or imaginary. They are made by their definition, let's say. They are made by a mathematical and a numerical matter. And they have some very specific properties. And this is also important, their meaning may change according to the context of their use. So, going back now to archaeology, we are trying to work on, since quite a long time now, on how to define a research methodology in archaeology which is based on a 3D approach. In other words, how 3D can help me as an archaeologist. So for that, and by the way, this is these are basic requirements for any research methodology. We need to be accounted for what we do, so someone else who comes from outside can check and validate what we do. And also reproducibility, which means that what we do can be reproduced somewhere else, and to obtain, of course, the same results. So for that, we need to have access to data. Our data must be transparent. This is the only way that somebody else from outside can say, yeah, you're right, or no, you're stupid. And also, which is, again, it has the same importance. Once we present our data, we have to also explicitly present the reasoning process, which was mentioned also in the previous presentation. So how do we arrive to a particular conclusion? This process has to be detailed. So I will show you now a very small case study, but I hope you will see also what is the complexity of such a work. So 2 years ago, we had the opportunity to go to the island of Sardinia and investigate a very important site there. The site itself is called Santa Cristina. What you see in literature, it is so this is one component of a larger site. So this thing here is called a sacred well. It has been dated more or less to 3,000 years, so it's more or less the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age of Sardinia, and is part of a very important culture which is called the Nuragic culture, which is almost unique to Sardinia. There are some remains in the Balearic Islands as well, but not so much. So you can see in the photos here the very, very elaborated structure with very carefully carved stone, with a very particular architecture. And what we wanted to do is to understand what is the socio-cultural context of this site, also trying to avoid these kind of interpretations of the site. So what you see here is a picture that was taken during our work, because the site was very popular among people who believe that the place has some energies from the sun, from the moon, from any other planet. So there were quite a lot of activities related to that there. And okay, we want to understand the socio-cultural context of this site. It has been found more than 100 years ago by several expeditions. Some of them also drew some rudimentary drawings, and there are also some pictures from the site, how it presented itself in the late 19th century. Then in the 60s, there were very extensive excavations, and also, as it happened at that time, the excavations themselves followed restoration and reconstructions, which, by the way, were never, ever published. So Enrico Azzeni, one of the main archaeologists of the island of Sardinia, refound the place, excavated it for more than 10 years, and the only publication that we have is a short oral report in a small conference in Sardinia. There are other sites which are similar, and I brought here some examples. Actually, in the whole island, there are around 60 sites like these. But interestingly, if one wants to go in detail and look at what has been published from these sites, we'll discover that actually none of the sites was ever published in a scientific way, which means that we don't have a plan, we don't have cross-sections, we don't have context of findings. And despite all this, there are many, many conferences where these sacred wells are brought in and they are discussed, and there is a lot of ink flowing, but and maybe now there are many digits flowing, but still we don't have much information. So once we started thinking about how to analyze the site in a more coherent way, we try to define which can be the factors that influence the shape of what we see today at the site. So we defined three main groups. One is the human factor, one is the natural factor, and the third one is the physical factor. So in terms of human factor, of course, is the tradition of making things, the knowledge that the society has, the knowledge that the builders themselves had, also what was the social role that this monument played, and the technical knowledge that was common in that period. And these are just some few examples of the factors that we brought in. Natural factors are, of course, slope, the geology, geomorphology of the land, environmental conditions, if the place was exposed, for example, to wind or not. Physical are the types of raw material, the properties, and so forth. So we 3D scanned, we positioned it in global coordinates. We did all the, now we can almost say that these are traditional steps. One important question that one may ask and note while we do this kind of work is to understand what do we miss, what do we erase, and which kind of data we lose when we 3D scan and we process our data. Because, okay, we set up our instrument of high resolution, which means that the distance between points may be 2 millimeters in this case, but actually we don't know because we don't have any metrological system to check that. Moreover, when we do the alignment and we do the cleaning and we do the noise reduction and we do all kinds of filters that we apply, again, it is very difficult to assess if we are losing any kind of important information. And important, again, is a very tense term because important may mean different things if you are looking from different perspectives. So in this case, for example, we were interested in understanding the general shape of stones and the general shape of walls, but if we would have been interested in, for example, identifying biological agents on the stones or on how the cracks are on the stones, we would have needed a different approach. So important is, may change a lot according to the questions we ask. So this is what we looked into, how to calculate shapes and sizes, and we look into how the place could have been accessed from different directions, try to identify construction phases, and we also estimated the human effort that was invested. These are the main components, just to give you a very brief terminology of terms that have been used. So the idea is that we have an outside enclosure here, then a keyhole. This is the term that is used in the literature, the keyhole structure, with a bench here that people maybe were sitting. These very monumental staircases that you see them here in the section that lead to a water basin down, which is covered by a tholos-shaped well, let's say, which has its opening on the surface here. So this is what we have. So this is just an example of how we start now to analyze things. So if you look on the outside enclosure, we may have two possibilities. Either it is very low, as it is now, and in that case, it was a symbolic delineation, a symbolic separation between the profane and the sacred, but it may have been also higher. So now I'm opening a parenthesis. When one goes now to the site and looks at it, there is nothing. It's very clean and very nice and grass and organized, but so it means that any kind of remains that may have been there, fallen stones, were taken away or they never existed. So if the wall, if this outside wall was higher, we checked if it could have been based on the shape of this wall, the shape of the stones, and if the geology was good enough to support such a weight. And okay, we arrived to the conclusion that yes, but, and here you see two examples of this outside wall, clearly they were functioning or they were responding to very different approaches. One here to obscure everything, and one here just to delineate. So for now, both options are valid because looking at other sites, we don't have any clue on that, and also here, we don't know. So both things can exist. Moving forward, trying to understand how the entire structure may have looked like, we know that in that period, no mortar was used, so the Nuragic people were building these massive structures from blocks of stones. So we calculated which kind of shape the cover should have been, and the only solution was a Corbel vault, a pseudo vault, which had to be at least 10 meters high in order to be support everything in terms of forces. Then we moved on and said, okay, let's try to see which kind of activities may have been inside the place. So we looked at the access, this bench, lighting, and we wanted also to understand what is the function and the role of the covering of the basin. And here we proposed two solutions, either like that, so this is earth, or like a cell covering, and both solutions do not work because of the weight. So having a well shape was the only solution to cover it, but it could have been closed much earlier. So the fact that the tholos was brought up to the surface means a particular purpose that goes beyond the physical constraints. So just as we looked further and we compared, and this is very interesting, this is how the tholos is going upwards, and this is what we see on the surface. And this ring here, this diameter here, fits perfectly with the diameter of the basin downstairs, down. So we may imagine a direct correlation between the two measurements. Further on, we try to understand what was the process of construction. And here we show, we propose the stages of building this entire structure. And finally, we come up with some proposals. And each one is a possibility of how the place may have looked like. For example, here we hypothesized the covering with wood. We checked, and in that period there were trees tall enough to obtain from them quite long beams, or another corbel covering, or nothing. And okay, this looks quite impressive now. So we have some archaeological implications and conclusions from that. For example, we estimated how many people could have worked for how long time, and we arrived to the conclusion that even though it looks very, very impressive and huge, the actual work invested, it's really not that big, and a relatively small community could have built it easily. What is also interesting to note when comparing with other sites, we can see that Santa Cristina is quite different from several details, which may tell us about the homogeneity of the society in that period. Okay, so what? So, in order to be able to communicate also with other researchers, in order to be able to have our data transparency, what we propose is a system, a digital system where we are capturing our reasoning model through an inference tree. And this is just one example how we are making, yeah. So this is an inference tree where we are systematically inferring our conclusions. We build up a decision tree where we can show our input, the nodes for decisions, and our output, everything documented in metadata. And this is how a repository, a knowledge repository looks like. This is the proposed that we are using, the architecture of such a project, such an infrastructure, where we have the objects, the metadata, CDOC-CRM files, and the inference tree in named graphs. In named graphs, we may have annotations. We are using X3D for the 3D visualization and so forth. So I hope I could convince you that 3D can be used as a research tool in archaeology. We have some nice and elegant solutions for archiving and describing ontology using CDOC-CRM. In the past, we looked and we published some papers on how to use fuzzy sets theory in order to express the uncertainty of our visualization. And if we need to have this kind of large collaboration structure, virtual environments, we need to have a solid data transparency. So, thank you.
Thank you for your report. Very interesting and fruitful. Maybe one question, please.
Thank you. Dear Sorin, I think you have gone so far that I would recommend you and your team, before making a further step to the working hypothesis of virtual reconstruction, to try to solve something which I tried, but due to the lack of funds, I have stopped. I have visited the Santa Cristina, I have sampled the wall, and I started dating, the construction, the architectural construction of this wall. So that would be very useful in the construction of yours. And generally, all the Nuraghi, monuments in Sardinia. So first is to apply dating of surface luminescence dating of the walls and different architectural phases. And second, which is very important as well, is the lighting of these stolos, which is the opening. It relates to the a specific date of the year that the sun shines, this rays shine into the water. This is the archaeoastronomy part. So that is another direction which you could involve your team, and you make reconstruction of this lighting, of the particular date of the year. That would be amazing. Thank you.
Okay, will do.
That's all. Yes, okay. Yes. It's the last question, please.
Спасибо. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I have one question. Are you also, the last slides of you, slides about the arguing system, reasoning model, yes. Are you keen on developing an application ontology based on CDOC-CRM with this inference tree? Is it an ongoing project? Can you tell us a little bit more?
Okay. So what you see here, we are looking into how to implement it using named graphs. So it's a kind of RDF, let's say. And this, what you see here, has to be, and we are doing that, to map it into CDOC. So each thing here should be somehow related to CDOC.
Are you using a content management system to? Are you using a content management system? Are you? Do you have some intersection that users like us can use it?
Yes. Yes. So there are many. There are very detailed questions, so I can show you.
Thank you, Sorin. Друзья мои, ну вот утреннее заседание у нас закончилось. мы немножко задержались по времени. Наша работа вообще очень тщательно рассчитана Дарьей Юрьевной, поэтому будьте внимательны и следите за регламентом. Ну а сейчас кофе-брейк, и вы можете все пройти, я так понимаю, в правые двери. Или вот в оркестровой яме, или вот здесь наверху на галерее.